Over time.
Watts. Composer over
With Nick Verzi.
Composer
Overtime.
Watts.
Composer over time.
With Andrew over
Composer over Verzi.
Composer and
Composer over time. Composer over time.
Andrew Watts.
Composer.
Welcome to Composer Overtime. My name is Andrew Watts.
And I'm Nick Verzi.
Composer Overtime is a series of interviews featuring discussions and works by innovative composers across the world today. Nick and I are both composers and doctoral candidates at Stanford University and will be facilitating these chats each week, sometimes with Bay Area guests and sometimes on location across the US and internationally.
During each episode, we will hear a new perspective on the contemporary music landscape, find out about the composer's creative process and musical background, as well as listen to some of their recent work.
This week, our guest is Joanna Bailie, a British composer living in Berlin, Germany. Joanna's music has been featured in a number of top festivals and residencies such as Donaueschingen, the Venice Biennale, Huddersfield, Borealis, Transit, and Darmstadt. Similarly, her works have been premiered by several leading ensembles today, including the London Sinfonietta, Exaudi, Ensemble Musikfabrik, Ensemble Neder, the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra, and the Ives Ensemble. Joanna began her university education in composition with Richard Barrett and later studied electronic music in Holland as well as composition at Columbia University in the city of New York. She completed her PhD at City University of London, and together with composer Matthew Shlomowitz, Joanna is the founder and artistic director of Ensemble Plus Minus. It was an enlightening interview recorded in Luxembourg City during the 2018 Rainy Days Festival, so let's jump right in.
Time.
Lots.
Come time.
Here in Luxembourg. I'm here with Joanna Bailie, and Joanna and I had met a few years ago at Stanford University. She had dropped in to give a day of masterclasses and lectures on her music. Just to give background, how did you get interested in composition?
That's always a funny question. I think I kind of went into it from a strange angle. I'd always been very interested in music, and I learned flute a little bit when I was younger. And when I was a teenager, I started learning the saxophone, and I got into jazz, actually. And so when I was, let's say, between the age of 14 and 18, I was learning how to improvise, jazz harmony, building up my jazz record collection. And I did think quite seriously about it as a thing that I wanted to do, be a jazz musician, but somehow I couldn't. I didn't think I would ever really be good enough as an instrumentalist. B, maybe I felt too constricted by it as a music, although I have a great deal of respect and fondness, love for it. And C, I couldn't see myself doing it because I couldn't think of any famous female jazz saxophone players or any jazz musicians that weren't singers, actually. I mean, very few and far between.
Yeah.
At least with composers, there were some. So they were already kind of there, and I felt, oh, okay, there's a place for me. And in fact, I went to Darmstadt in 1994 for the first time, and I remember I saw a Klangforum Wien concert with, it was a piece by Olga Neuvert, and I thought, oh yeah, that's who I'm going to be like. And now, of course, I'm not very much like Olga Neuvert, but somehow I felt the possibility. I felt attracted to it for all sorts of reasons. And then I did, in the UK, you sort of specialise in your exams in the last 2 years of school. And I moved schools actually, and I was originally going to take A-levels in English history and art history, and then I moved school and art history wasn't available and there was music, and I thought, well, I'm doing jazz, I'm really interested in music, so I'll do music. And through my music A-level, although it was quite tedious in a lot of ways, we had this anthology, and there were pieces from the 20th century in it, and I liked those pieces. And I was drawn into it, and then finally I was supposed to read English at university, and I changed at the last minute and decided to take a music degree instead.
Was your entry into composition through jazz, or was it very much like there was my interest in music that's jazz related, and then concurrently you were, going through A-levels?
I think it was probably through jazz. There were jazz composers, obviously they're improvising, but there were jazz composers. I was a big admirer of the saxophonist Wayne Shorter, who's, famously writes very beautiful jazz tunes. I'm using quotation marks, but the actual piece that's improvised on. He's famously writes very beautiful ones with quite complicated and strange harmonic movement in them. And I think I kind of wanted, that was the thing I started to do, actually, trying to write the tunes that one would improvise on, and to work with the things that I knew from having studied jazz harmony.
So your first compositions were jazz works, or something you would
No, even when I was doing my A-levels, I didn't actually end up writing anything. I was too hesitant.
Really?
Yeah, and I had to drop the composition module and take a 16th century counterpoint instead at the very last moment, and it was not a success. And I think I was pretty lucky to even be able to get into universities to study music, because it wasn't my strongest A-level subject by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I was playing a lot of rock and a lot of jazz, and my senior year of high school, I had an independent study that I had proposed that was jazz composition. So I started already getting this idea that composition is a thing within these genres that I'm already very familiar with, and then tangentially I knew some classical music. Once I went to college for undergraduate in composition, it was a very strange notion that all of the composers here had been doing this for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. And you're an outsider because you play jazz and rock guitar. So put away the guitar and hit the books, get up to speed on the entirety of classical music history. And then you could start calling yourself a proper composer. Did you run into that at all, studying composition in college?
Well, we did have to go through compositional techniques at A-level and at university level, I didn't feel it very strongly, and I think still now, and we can talk about this, but there is a disconnect between some of the technical ways you can study composition, or actually the reproduction of 18th century compositional techniques and composition.
I think that's also a very big distinction that I've noticed between the UK and the US in terms of the pedagogy.
Yeah.
It seems like the undergraduate focus for composition in the UK is very much based on pastiche as a learning device, and that's not the case in the US. Of course, we learn how to do, 4-part harmony a la Johann Sebastian Bach, or you might understand the basics of writing a piano sonata like Mozart, but we're not really tasked with writing a lot of works in the style of other people.
Yeah.
Whereas, at least my experience through Oxford, hearing about what the undergraduates in composition or undergraduates in music who were composing, it felt like that was a big part of their lives.
Yeah, not a very inspiring one either. I'm not quite sure what it's for. Thankfully, we only did 1 year of it at university, and by the second year, we were just doing composition. And then it was a whole different ballgame. How do you select pitches if you don't want to write?
Yeah. That's a question that I'm asking today.
Yeah, no, and we all should keep on asking ourselves this question. And Of course, I've got plenty of strategies now, but at the time I didn't have any. And it was like swimming in the dark for quite some time.
Do you notice any parallels between ways that you had approached music when you were starting out, or even before you were composing, just as a saxophone player, versus what you're doing now? Are there any common links?
Yeah, I think maybe one main one is that I do tend towards slowness.
Oh, okay.
Actually, when I was playing jazz saxophone, I did enjoy a nice, complicated ballad. Let's say, yeah. I mean, a ballad with interesting changes.
Right.
And I was scared to death of doing like rhythm changes really fast, or a Charlie Parker tune with these really, really fast changes in them. Maybe I'm just a very, very slow person or something like that, but I need my time with music. I need my time with sound.
Yeah.
And I also like slower music. Not even when I'm not writing it. I need my time to understand and for the sounds to sit properly within me. I'm not impressed by fastness.
I see. Let's talk a little bit about your compositional process. So this is something that I feel a lot of people, especially outside of music, have misconceptions about the modern composer. There's this certain romanticized notion that I've run into a few times where they might think, oh, we're just sitting underneath a tree, just waiting for the muse to speak to us, and we have our quill. And
yeah.
How is your compositional process like if you're starting a new work?
Hopefully before I even begin to do anything, I'll have had an idea of what could possibly happen in this piece and what it might be about. And that will hopefully lend itself to whatever compositional context I've been offered, actually. That's an interesting thing. I don't always get to choose what forces I write for and what context they're in. It's like, you get an email and someone says, would you like to write a piece for a small chamber ensemble? Should be about 20 minutes. No video, please, or something like that. Hopefully, before I start the piece, I've already got some kind of strong idea about what it should be about, or what it should involve. And the first stage of that piece is often just finding some raw material for it. So that's often making field recordings, or making a video of something. That's an important part to kind of get myself into the process. And I often end up not using the field recordings that I think I'm making for this project and using some older ones, because of course I'm always trying to build up an archive to use. But it generally starts with that. And then I often work electronically for the next part of the process. And in fact, compose the piece electronically. By manipulating the field recordings, adding other sounds, mixing, whatever. Then I'll make a transcription of whatever things I think I might like to write or use the musicians in the piece. And then the last piece is really trying to arrange this kind of top layer of instruments and write the score.
So the electronics always come first?
Yeah, these days.
Yeah. When you're writing out the instrumental parts, is this straight into the computer, or are you pen and paper?
It depends on the piece, it depends on the level of complexity and how big the forces are. The last couple of pieces I've done, I've been able to really just make a short score of it. So not write out completely in a full manuscript. Yeah, just make a short score and then put that into the computer and start elaborating on the computer, which is nice. It sort of saves a little bit of time because copying is tedious. Yeah,
and by short score, do you mean like just like 4 staves or 2 staves?
Yeah, exactly.
Very reduced. Okay,
yeah.
So that's a bit classical.
It's a bit classical, isn't it? And it's a funny thing because we haven't spoken about this, but I used to write a very different kind of music. than the one that I write now. And the music that I wrote before was purely acoustic, and it was quite complicated, quite dense textures, quite idiomatically written.
Yeah.
And of course I would always write that out on paper before I entered it into the score, always.
Yeah.
And now I don't need to do that anymore. It's...
What was the impetus for this shift in style?
I think I just slowly began to get interested in something else.
Okay.
And, you know, sometimes one can start writing a certain kind of music and you realise that it's not really what you're supposed to be doing. You know, I got into this particular type of... I wasn't really writing new complexity, but I was writing something a little bit grungy and dark and complicated with... Richard Barrett was actually my teacher after my undergrad. And, of course, I still love his music very much. And as all students do, I tried to imitate certain aspects of his work, this sound world. I enjoyed it very much. But I think... various things happened to me to make me start wondering whether I'd actually really found the music that I was supposed to write. I remember my first encounters with Feldman. That was quite a striking thing. And I had a few encounters with Wandelweisery type of music, and this shifting of my attention, or this framing of my attention. It was quite important. Maybe a St. Paul on the road to Damascus moment. And I thought, this can be music too. And on a very practical level, actually, because I was starting to get interested in using electronic sounds a bit more, I bought a little Tascam, and I began to record things, and then I really began to get into recording things.
Perhaps your shift is maybe a shift from focusing in on just the instruments to then expanding to the world itself.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way of doing it. I guess my music is still as complicated and dense as it was, but the density and complexity has been shifted from the instrumentalists to the tape part,
right,
and to the sound of the world. Oh yeah, and an important fourth influence was, of course, the Austrian composer Peter Ablinger. I encountered his music. Someone lent me a CD, and again, it was a feeling I didn't know that new music could sound like this. Have these resonances, have this kind of connection to the world.
Let's talk a little bit about what you're working on these days. What strikes me is the way that you blend the electronics, in that it feels native. It feels like the music for the instrumentalists belongs with these electronics. It's not some contrived environment that has these two entities. And I suppose hearing you talk about your process makes sense, in that the environment was created for these instrumental parts to exist in with the electronics.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your approach specifically with that set? I know it's many different works, but was there a common approach or common thread among these different pieces?
Yeah, it's difficult to, I mean, there's a whole bunch of pieces called Artificial Environment, and in fact there are other pieces that are not called Artificial Environment, which are really in the same field. Mm-hmm. There's a cello piece called Trains.
Yeah, you had presented that at Stanford.
For instance, which is very much in the Artificial Environment series. I just thought, I need to change the title now. It was a good title while it lasted. And Symphony Street Souvenir, to a certain extent, is also part of this series.
So you run into someone, let's say at a social event. Mm-hmm. They haven't met you before, and they ask you what you do.
Oh, yes.
How do you describe to non-musicians what you do?
That's a hard one. Sometimes I would really like to say I'm an artist.
Okay.
Actually, I would prefer to say that. Especially now I'm dabbling in multimedia. And I'm not really the most composerly composer that...
What do you mean by that?
Ever lived. Well,
who is the most composerly composer
who ever lived? I'm not the most composerly composer around at the moment, especially with the focus a little bit taken off the instruments, or certainly from contemporary language of musical instruments.
But is that maybe a false hierarchy in what it means to be a composer?
I hope so.
Yeah.
But I'm aware of this thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are several reasons I like to say that I'm an artist. But I do sometimes say that I'm an artist. I said it to my neighbours when I first moved into my flat, and actually they think I'm a painter. All of them think I'm a painter, and it's like if I actually correct them and say, well, actually I'm composing at home. They're going to be thinking, well, this woman is absolutely crazy. She keeps on changing her mind about what she is. But I just meant artist in a general sense of the word.
But it also kind of opens up the equal misconception for the artist, right?
Yeah.
if they think all artists just draw all the time, and that's not true for them either. So
no,
you've avoided one misconception by deflecting to another.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on the occasions I do tell people I'm a composer, it is of course very difficult to describe. And as you said at the beginning, there were these cliches about what the process involves. Maybe like trying things out on a piano and writing things on manuscript and whatever. And actually trying to place the kind of music that you write in the context of all the music they know, that's almost impossible.
Yeah. I run into that a lot in instances like where I am now, at a music festival. So you fly halfway around the world, you get to meet these great composers and musicians, and sometimes, which happened not to be the case this time because we had rehearsals pretty soon after we arrived, but occasionally you'll get to a festival and you'll talk to composers for a week before actually hearing any of their music, and you get a sense for them as people, and because you're a composer, they're a composer, you're talking about music and composition, and you feel as though you could predict what their music would sound like, and occasionally you can, but oftentimes it's not at all how they talk about music. There's a strange disconnect that I perceive, which may be just a fault of my own, or maybe a fault of their own, because they're not describing their music how they're actually perceiving other music. But it also could just be an inherent difficulty in what we do, where it's very hard to articulate, just using language, what our music sounds like. guess the last big topic that I always enjoy finding out about for each of these discussions is what each composer is interested in for the future. It could be the future of your own music, or it could be the future of contemporary music in general. Mm-hmm. So where do you see the next 5 or 10 years?
Mm-hmm. There are all sorts of aspects to that question. I'm a bit worried about the future of contemporary music, simply because of things that are happening in the world at the moment, that it's becoming more and more popular right-wing people are seizing power. And I wonder, even in the relative oasis of France and Germany, whether if the wrong people I want to qualify this by saying that if those kind of people manage to get into positions of power, much worse things are going to happen than art losing its subsidies. But it is actually, it's one of the things they generally go for. What would we do if suddenly the SBR couldn't fund Donaueschingen or the SBR orchestras or Eclat Festival or all these kind of things? Do we have to be prepared to try and be the cockroaches after the nuclear Armageddon and be the people still standing? I went to a concert recently, and it was in Berlin, and it was what you would normally describe as Exaudi music. So it's the more experimental, improvised thing, and Vondelweisery kind of music, and it was 4 people playing very beautifully, actually, some compositions by various people, and there were maybe 10 of us in the audience, and I don't know if anybody was being paid anything for it, but I thought these people will survive a funding apocalypse because they're incredibly committed in a very particular way. And maybe it's the flashy composers who write for orchestras and are surviving on commissions or whatever. It's suddenly the carpet is, the rug is drawn out from under their feet, they're going to stop, actually.
Will they?
I don't know.
The thing is, I also view those composers to be in a very privileged position, and it so happens that people in most domains that are in power, if their context collapses, they're usually still okay. Like, they just kind of leapfrog to other parallel things. Maybe they wouldn't get commissions from large orchestras anymore.
They have patrons, maybe.
But they have patrons, or often they're part of institutions already, so they have a steady paycheck, regardless of these commissions.
Yeah, but then what happens when the music departments in universities get shut down?
Yeah.
This is something that's happening in the UK.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a worrying thing. Definitely. About the future, and I wonder what's going to happen for the foreseeable future in the rest of my lifetime, actually.
This reminded me of a recent event that's tangentially related. So it was making the news rounds even in the United States, and maybe particularly on my Facebook feed because I have so many European composer friends. This proposal of playing recordings of, I think they kept using the term atonal music in the subways in Berlin.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? I think they ultimately decided against it.
Yeah.
But what are your opinions on that?
Of course there was a counter protest. Well, there was a protest actually, and there was some of the musicians organised a concert. Actually, Trains was played at this particular concert.
Okay.
It was
so you got a performance out of it.
Yeah, quite relevant. In terms of, trains and trains. Okay, underground trains and overground trains. Again, we just watched that Cory Archangel video piece of Schoenberg and the cats playing Schoenberg, and it's the same thing, isn't it? That this is the ugly music. It sounds like a cat walking over a piano. it was such a trite, silly thing to even contemplate doing, and actually very disrespectful for the poor people who were not in a very good position, that they have to sleep in U-Bahn stations. Totally disrespectful for everybody concerned.
Was there a little bit of you that was, I mean, of course, on an intellectual level, yeah, that's very disrespectful and offensive. But if that actually happened, I enjoy contemporary music.
Yeah, but that's would they hang around the S-Bahn?
Yeah, would they have like perhaps the opposite effect for like all of the composers in Berlin, which there are many of.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I'm not a big fan of piped music anyway.
Of course.
Or there is enough music in the world that we don't need.
Right, because it's removing any agency from the listener.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of its point.
Yeah.
It's pushing people away because it's this forced music. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
My pleasure.
And I look forward to the upcoming performances.
Thank you.
That was our interview with Joanna Bailie, a British composer living in Berlin. More of her music is available at joannabailie.com. That's JoannaBailie.com.
If you would like to hear more episodes, new interviews are broadcast on the radio, Fridays at 2 p.m. Pacific Time through KZSU 90.1 FM, as well as on Composer Overtime's YouTube and SoundCloud. Zero.